Assalamu alaikum everyone. Welcome to another episode of Single Muslim Live with me, your host Maedeh Sharifi, broadcasted exclusively on British Muslim TV, sponsored by SingleMuslim.com. We are live currently on Sky channel 752 as well as across social media platforms on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube and Instagram. Wherever you are watching from, a very warm welcome. Now remember, as always, you can be a part of tonight's conversation by calling in live to the studio, and that's on 01924231083. Now, please do remember standard rates will apply, so make sure you have your bill payer's permission. You can also drop us a comment or a question on WhatsApp in confidence on 07950797017. Alternatively, also drop us a comment on our live streams. I have yet another special guest for everyone tonight. So if you have any burning questions regarding relationships or anything,
really
you can feel free to send those.
Keep it going.
Send those today. My special guest, I will give you guys a little brief background before I introduce her. She's had first-hand experience working with Muslim women. She's graduated from Cardiff University with a bachelor's in psychology in 2012. In 2017, she achieved her doctorate in counselling psychology and has a relationship and boundaries course released very soon via online. My special guest will be Dr. Nadia, who we will welcome very shortly. Before we do so, I do realise today is the first night of lockdown. So I hope you're all coping well. And do remember, we did get through the first month of lockdown back in Easter summer, so we will get through this all together as well, inshallah. Don't forget, you can be part of tonight's conversation as well. Send in your questions, any comments you have, any queries. No question is too silly, so feel free to put those forward to Dr. Nadia. We will be talking about boundaries, and that's both within courtship, so during courtship before marriage, as well as within marriage. If you have any questions regarding boundaries, do send those in. We will be explaining what boundaries are for those that may not know, but I'm super excited to give you all this psychological perspective and angle from such a talented and very highly educated and knowledgeable woman such as Dr. Nadia. For next week's show, you can also send in questions beforehand, and that's on the same WhatsApp number and our same calling number. If you do want to call in live today, just to let you know, we can take it anonymous, so no worries regarding that. And before I do introduce my guest, I also wanted to go back to what I said earlier on regarding lockdown, and if anyone's going through any hardships, sad time today under the weather.
We're not ready yet.
Do remember that there is good in everything that Allah puts us through, and you know, as humans we tend to plan, but God is honestly the best planners. And I hope if you are yet looking for your good, you do find it within tonight's hour through the show. Something or Nadia might say will resonate with all of us, definitely. And remember, if you do you want any advice regarding relationships, you can also send that to us via our social media platforms. And if you are feeling down and need someone to talk to, remember Samaritans is only a call away, and that's on 116123. And if you or anyone is in immediate danger, please call the emergency lines of your country. In the UK, that is 999. And I actually want to know how everyone else's day is going. So feel free, you can also call in now. Tell me how your day is going. If you have any questions regarding later, you can also send those in beforehand. Please do call in hand. We had so many calls last week, and it really was a pleasure, honestly, hearing everyone's perspective and personal experiences. I do want to send a very big thank you to everyone that did tune in last week and shared very personal experiences with us. I feel really honoured that those individuals found British Muslim TV to be a safe space to share their feelings and emotions and personal experiences with me and my guests on the previous week. That is the type of energy I do want to push forward every week. So as always, do feel free. This is a place of no judgment at all. You can call at any time during the show and we'll be more than happy to answer your calls. And I'm just hoping you're all tapping away and sending in questions right now. We did have a few on social media, which we'll be asking Dr. Nadia. And it doesn't have to be just on boundaries. Dr. Nadia actually is going to give you exclusive pointers on how to discover ourselves better and to contribute to our self-development. And you know what? I am a firm believer that in order to attract better, and that's whether it's in relationship, friendships, or careers, we have to do better. And I think we have the privilege to have Dr. Nadia share this platform with us today. And I was actually having a conversation with a future guest, and we were just saying, as Muslim women, in Britain particularly, we have the luxury of being represented across all different platforms, whether that's psychology, the teaching industry, the political industry. We are represented across the board, alhamdulillah. So do use this opportunity to really connect and really ask the questions that you do want to ask.
Remember, you can tweet
and
us, get
remember,
us on
you can also tweet us and get us on Twitter at British Muslim TV.
Right, we're ready with the guests. We're ready with the guests.
Questions. Now, that's enough speaking from me. I will introduce you my guest. A very warm welcome to Dr. Nadia. Assalamu alaikum, Nadia.
How are you? Can you hear me?
We'll come back to you in a minute. We'll come back to you
in a minute. Now, where was I? We were speaking about, yes, representation. So I just want to tell everyone, like, honestly, this hour, I think we should all make the most of it when we do have such knowledgeable, educated, and highly successful people on the panel sharing this floor with me. There's honestly no question is too silly, so it's always good to educate ourselves and really develop self-growth. And we are under lockdown. I feel like this is the perfect moment, not to sound cliche, but to really work on ourselves, and we can, inshallah, come out
as involved on social media.
So please do make sure you do get involved on social media.
We are getting comments that are coming through.
Social media platforms. We already are getting comments coming through. So just keep them coming and keep questions coming along for Nadia, which we will connect with very shortly. And also, in addition to the social media, I'd like to remind you, we also take WhatsApp questions that I will be asking, I'll be attending to throughout the show. And our lines do remain open on 01924231083. And remember, as I reiterated before, standard rates will apply, so please make sure you have your bill payer's permission. Before we do get introduced,
let's try and bring in our guest again.
I also want to point out that any questions and comments that do send can be sent anonymous. I know some of us are funny about that.
You can bring in the guest in now.
We can bring in the guest in now. I'm ready for you, Dr. Nadia. Assalamu alaikum.
Hey, assalamu alaikum.
How are you today? Thank you so much for joining us.
That's right. I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
We'll dive straight in, Dr. Nadia. Now, for today's show, we are obviously going to be speaking about boundaries during courtship and marriage. But before we go into all of that, for the viewers that are watching and are thinking, what are boundaries? How would you explain that to them?
Yeah, so, I mean, boundaries is a term that gets thrown around quite a lot. And actually, there's a lot of people that have no idea what it means. So, essentially, if I was to say to you right now that, okay, my schedule is really busy, can we rebook this another time? That's an example of a boundary. So a boundary is something that differentiates where one person is and another person. So if you have two people with their own identities, the boundary is the line that differentiates where one person begins and another person, I guess, where they begin. So you have your beginning and your end. It can be a little bit abstract, but I'm sure as we get talking, we'll kind of throw examples around so that people can get an idea of what it is.
Yeah, of course, because it can be applied to all streams of life. In terms of relationship-wise, how would someone go about setting boundaries when they're getting to know someone for marriage and also during marriage?
Yeah. So it is really important. I know, like I mentioned, not many people are aware of what boundaries actually are. But if we think of our self-esteem, our self-worth, our self-respect, boundaries are really important to maintain that in relationships. So obviously when we go into a relationship, or even with the intention of, okay, I'm going to get to know somebody for marriage, we need to know what our boundaries are so that we can be respected, so we can keep ourselves safe, but also so that we can honor our needs and the other person's as well. So it's really about creating safety and trust in a relationship. So, for example, if this was during initial stages of getting to know somebody with the intention of marriage, as a female, some of the boundaries, or even as a male, it doesn't really matter, it's important for both people, could be around how often we communicate. There could be things around how and where we meet, and I guess the types of conversations we have, whether there's family present, whether it's something, okay, are we okay just meeting alone? Do we need friends with us? So it really depends on the individual and what is okay for the individual. I think a lot of times what can happen is if a person is not aware of what their boundaries are, they can very easily maybe be disrespected, or it can be quite easy for somebody to maybe take advantage. And so that person really needs to know, okay, what am I okay with? What things do I value that are important to me to I guess allow the other person to understand me a bit better as well. Because when we say boundaries, we're not creating walls between people. We want people to be able to respect each other and honor each other as well. So it is really important to have boundaries from the beginning.
Brilliant. So I guess boundaries ties in very much with self-respect.
Yeah.
In terms of, now a lot of psychologists do say in order to put your boundaries forward, you need to be really assertive. What is your take on that?
Yeah, well, as a psychologist, I would agree. But it can also be really hard, because just speaking from a kind of female perspective, often we're not taught about communication. So essentially, when you're asserting yourself or you're being assertive, it's a communication style essentially. But if that's something we're not taught, it can be difficult for us then to know how to do it.
It's definitely something that we're not taught, so that's why you will be teaching us all today. And in terms of, do you feel like should we make our boundaries clear at the beginning, or would you like go with the flow, and then if something arises, red flags or anything, and then put your boundaries forward? How would you best go about setting boundaries?
Yeah, boundaries are quite fluid. So, I mean, some people might be a bit more strict with certain boundaries, but it is something that if you can set from the beginning what your maybe preferences, what your values are, you're showing the other person how they can treat you, basically, the type of things that you will tolerate and where you draw your lines. So it is good to have them there from the beginning, but it's something that changes as well. So, I mean, my boundaries, for example, with family might be quite different to boundaries with friends. Boundaries with somebody maybe that I'm getting to know for marriage will be different, completely different as well. But you can allow the relationship to develop while practicing setting your boundaries at the same time. And it's actually really important to do this because you get to see how the other person responds to your boundaries. And that's where you mentioned about red flags. So if you're trying to set your boundaries and the other person is maybe they're not tolerating them, or maybe they're kind of disrespecting the boundaries, it gives you a kind of idea of what that person is like and what things might be like if you were to go forward, maybe pursue things a little bit further. So yeah, you kind of set the scene with the boundaries you're setting, but you can also learn about the other person and how they respond to you setting the boundaries.
That is very interesting what you said about response, honestly. I feel like if we set our boundaries, you're making it sound like it's going to be so much more easier. Now, you spoke about boundaries could be different person to person, so with family, partner, someone you're getting to know for marriage. From your experience and working with your clients, is there any point where boundaries are different, or we need to approach different boundaries during courtship versus in marriage when we're already married to that person?
I guess you're kind of dealing with two different situations, but obviously when you're getting to know somebody for marriage, it is important to think ahead and, okay, if we were to get married, what things would look like. And I mean, I know of people who have kind of gone through their marriage contracts or the nikah contract and maybe added some clauses in, whether it's about, I don't know, being able to socialize or about having our own space or our own home, separate from the in-laws after getting married. So people do these things, and it is important that it is respected, I guess, by the other party.
Yeah, it seems to be all about respect when it comes to boundaries. Now, for you, Dr. Nadia, what boundaries have been important for you that you can potentially share with our audience that some may perhaps resonate with?
Yeah. Okay, this is quite a funny one because I actually didn't know how to set boundaries. I probably didn't know what they were when I got married. So it has been a learning curve for me as well. But one thing that definitely stands out is initially, I know where we've mentioned about communication and being able to communicate boundaries. So, I mean, not only did I not know what some of my boundaries were, but I definitely didn't know how to communicate them either. So one thing that was important for me and my husband is about the time, how much time we spend together and how much time we spend apart. So for him, friendship is really important, and obviously he had friends before we got married, and he's continued those friendships on afterwards, which is healthy. But I had to get used to communicating my needs. Like if I wanted to spend more time with him, or if, for example, I felt that actually I haven't seen you much today, is it okay that we arrange something for us to do as well after you've been out? Things like that, for example. But also I like my own space. So I've been able to kind of communicate, okay, actually I need a bit of time alone right now, or I've had a busy day at work. I just want a relaxed evening. You can kind of go do your own thing. So little things like that, but actually they're quite big things.
Definitely. So it will involve a lot of communication, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, you can't get out of it without communicating.
And what about for those people that do want to set boundaries, but often you have some people that are potentially not like scared, but have like some fear, they don't know how the other person's going to react, or some self-doubt, or even guilt. What's your advice to those people?
Yeah, that's a big one actually. I mean, I do work with a lot of women who experience guilt for even when they start thinking about setting boundaries. There's a kind of initial like a reaction, like, oh my gosh, I can't do this. Like it will make me seem quite mean or quite rude or quite selfish.
Yeah.
But it's not actually. It's something that is important for us, like our sense of self, our identity. Like if we think of our identity, it's our whole person. That's what we bring into a relationship, into a marriage, into a family. And if we feel guilty or scared, I mean, either that's because maybe we haven't had much practice with it, or there might be things in the relationship that may need to be addressed. One of the red flags with setting boundaries is actually, okay, if you feel like you're walking on eggshells, if you feel that you always have to be, I guess you're a bit worried about making your partner angry, for example, that is quite a red flag, and I guess it's quite unhealthy in a relationship. But it's not the case. That's not the case for everyone. If there is a bit of fear or a bit of guilt, it's important just to stay firm with the boundaries, because it builds your own confidence as well.
Yeah, thank you for your response. I guess it is kind of like a journey, as with everything else. In terms of boundaries before marriage, so that is very important in getting to know someone and, of course, building a foundation to be with them for life. What other pointers would you advise young Muslim women or any single Muslim woman that is getting to know someone or is in search for a life partner, what pointers would you give them as well as boundaries?
You mean like outside of boundaries?
Outside of boundaries.
Oh gosh, that's a big question.
We'll get back to it in a second. We actually have a caller
Okay.
on line one. Assalamu alaikum.
Oh gosh.
Hello?
Hello.
Hello, what is your
Yes.
question?
Am I speaking to Maedeh Sharifi?
Yes, you are indeed.
Yes, hello. Good evening.
Hi, good evening. Thank you for calling.
Hello. My name's Counselling.
Nice to meet you.
And it's very nice what Dr. Nadia Sadiq, she was saying. Family needs to be involved when someone's found a love marriage. And, you know, the truth of the matter is that we are living in a technological world. Every young Muslim, Hindu, Sikh, all other religions, they're holding technology that's so advanced that our minds are being taken away from our religious beliefs that were made hundreds, thousands of years ago. Today, we're living in a society where human being accepts.
I was struggling. I think caller's disconnected. That is a question we're actually going to have to refer to the alim. But thank you for sending in that question and calling in. In terms of that, before I had the call, so we're talking about pointers, Nadia. And off air, we did speak about some like essential ones and necessary ones we do need to address as women. For you, what would be your top three, you'd say?
I would say not to rush. It's definitely because, I mean, even people, clients that I've worked with as well, there is often a pressure, particularly when people are, females in particular, are getting to a certain age. They can often experience quite a lot of pressure from family or society, or even just the kind of, it's something that they've internalized themselves growing up. But yeah, I would say not to try not to feel pressured and not rush into something. It's also important to make sure you know what you're looking for in a partner as well. Not saying you have like a whole list of criteria or like the tick boxes, because you do have to compromise. Like we don't always get everything that we want in a person. So you can be ambitious, but also try and be realistic as well. And I guess because we've been talking about boundaries, the third thing that I would say is to make sure you know where your boundaries are, and that you kind of don't lose your own sense of identity, sense of respect and value when you're trying to find someone. Obviously, the person that you want to be with, if you've started speaking to them, you want them to be somebody who also values you as well. So yeah, just keep that in mind.
Indeed. So it's not as simple as just sticking to the tick boxes. And that is a refreshing reminder from Dr. Nadia that us women were not on a shelf life. So there's absolutely no need to rush. Thank you, Nadia. We have a question for you coming on WhatsApp. And that question reads, how do you set sexual boundaries when not in the mood as a woman?
That's a good question. I don't think it's something it's not a topic that we talk about much really. But you definitely are within your right to set these boundaries, and it's really, really, really important. I know obviously this topic is one that it's very intimate, and it's just kind of between husband and wife, and people again, with that respect, like the person that we get married to needs to respect those boundaries. Like, I mean, the sexual relationship that we have someone is it's the most intimate kind of relationship that we have. Being clear in what is okay and what's not. Like, okay, like I'm happy with this, but I'm really not comfortable with this. Not in a with any type of boundaries. We're not blaming the person. We're just communicating to them what's comfortable and what's okay for us, so that they can understand us. So, I mean, our needs can get fulfilled, and theirs as well. So you can always come to a kind of compromise or negotiation. But I'd say it's a very important boundary to set, because it's such a personal and intimate thing, and no one should ever sort of feel kind of forced, especially with something like this. Obviously, there are things that there's a line where it does become kind of a illegal, or kind of, we can see in kind of a bit of a criminal kind of sense. Yeah, so it's not something to take lightly.
And for setting that boundary in terms of intimacy, would you say that, because it is something so personal, that sister that's sending that question, or brother, it was anonymous, that there isn't actually a need to even explain ourselves?
Yeah, definitely, you're right. And I think with boundaries, we can sometimes feel like that okay, I'm setting this boundary, and I need to say why, or I need to say, I need to justify it, or I need to explain it. But I think some of that may come from maybe a bit of fear or the guilt. But actually, any boundary that we set, we can, if we want to think of how we might word it. So, okay, you can start with how it's impacting you. So I feel X, Y, Z when you do X, Y, Z, because of whatever, or then providing a kind of solution. So again, it's not in that kind of blaming sense, but it's something that you are quite clear about.
Indeed, I think we all needed to hear those words. Thank you, Nadia. I hope that answered your question, and thank you for sending that in. Now, on the topic of boundaries, Nadia, now you, as a psychologist in your field, you're very admired by Muslim women for that representation and being able to resonate with them. I have a question. My question is, do you feel like the boundaries can be different for a Muslim woman and a non-Muslim woman? So is there any boundaries that us Muslim women have to be more cautious of setting rather than any other women?
That's a good question. Maybe. I mean, boundaries do vary, like, from individual to individual. I mean, even as two Muslim women, our boundaries might look quite different as well, and that's fine. That's completely okay, because we're all individual, and everyone's very different. But there are certain things, obviously, for Muslim women, or even a Christian woman, or somebody of a different faith, that from our religion, there will be things that are maybe emphasized more. Or, for example, if we think about premarital relationships, that's something from a religious perspective that is not something we would engage in. So our boundaries around those things would probably maybe be a little bit more, I don't know, you could say stricter if you wanted, I don't know, but obviously there are certain things that are in place from religion, through religious teachings, that may not necessarily be there for somebody else. But yeah, it does vary individual by individual, because even though we have some religious things that we might take into consideration, again, people vary in terms of how much they follow the religion as well. So yeah, there's not necessarily a right or wrong in that sense, but there's a lot of differences.
But you know, it was very fascinating what you said, actually, that even between Muslim women there are different boundaries, of course. And for the women that are married, a lot of women do want to know on how to set boundaries with their in-laws. What would be your best advice to do that? Would it be through speaking to their partner or conversation with their in-laws? What would you advise these women that do want to set those boundaries with their in-laws?
Yeah, that's a good question, because there's a lot of women that, I guess, obviously when you move into a new family, there's a lot of people to adjust to and a lot of different rules to get used to. The boundaries that maybe we had with our own families might not necessarily be the same, or we might kind of come up with new boundaries just because our environment has changed. With this, it again depends on the family. There are a lot of families and in-laws that are very open-minded, that kind of, I guess, don't really interfere and are quite easy to talk to and communicate with. Obviously, you get some who are maybe a bit more rigid in their thinking, maybe have a bit more expectations, maybe a bit more difficult, not as open in terms of listening or communicating. So it does depend on the family, but sometimes, I mean, personally and from people that I know, like, it can be useful speaking to the partner and then the partner speaking to the parents. A lot of times boundaries that are set between husband and wife, like that's enough for a marriage to, I guess, be okay and kind of flourish in that environment. But often if there are difficulties, then often people can find it easier speaking to the partner and then the partner speaking to the family, or then everyone speaking together. But it does depend on the family. I know not every family is open. So it can be a struggle.
Indeed, it is really a process when it comes to in-laws.
Yeah. And it's not something that, it doesn't happen overnight either. Like, there's so much that we learn about ourselves and the people that we're living with after we get married. If we move in with in-laws, we can't expect ourselves to have everything sorted from the get-go.
Exactly, and there's so much dynamics to take into consideration, where the in-laws are from, how the background, education-wise. So it is a lot to consider. But thank you for your answer. I want to go back to slightly off topic from boundaries, but back to the pointers that we were talking about earlier on. And just in terms of the clients you see, and from a psychological perspective, what do you think is a challenge or challenges facing single Muslim women in terms of finding a partner or within their marriage that you feel like should be addressed?
I think a big one is around the living situations, actually. I do come across that quite a lot, where, like, from a cultural perspective, there might be certain expectations that people might have, like a man's parents might have of a daughter-in-law, for example. It sometimes can feel like, okay, it's like a prescribed thing that, okay, when a Pakistani or South Asian or Muslim woman gets married and she'll live with the in-laws, and this is what she will do. So those sort of things, I guess, can be quite a struggle, and not necessarily everyone thinks about it beforehand, before they get married. So yeah, I forgot what the question was. I think I went a bit off topic.
No, you was answering the question, Zairi. The question is mainly talking about the challenges your clients face or you feel like should be addressed. And you did mention reference in-laws.
Yeah.
And is that something that's very common? Because I get that a lot on my Instagram, and other people I know that are in the field, especially my previous guest, Sammy, said she gets that a lot on her messages as well about conflict with the in-laws. So is boundaries something important regarding that?
Yeah, boundaries are really important, because if you want healthy relationships, you don't want to be stepping on each other's toes. You don't want to be, like, I guess, getting in each other's way, or kind of frustrating each other, or having confrontations and things. And a lot of this can be, obviously depending on what the issue is, but a lot of times these things can be resolved by setting boundaries and people respecting those boundaries as well. Clients that I've worked with, this is one of the things that they kind of worry about with marriage as well. That, like, okay, actually, when I tell somebody that I don't really want to live with in-laws, I want my own space, it kind of becomes a bit of an issue. Not to say that it's like that with everyone. It does depend on the culture as well. There's a lot of cultures that, for example, what I know from the Somali culture, that they ensure that the husband already has a separate house, so before they get married. So I guess that's a kind of a boundary there as well.
As a very clear boundary, and that's very interesting, actually. Now, we'll come back to the topic of in-laws because that is always a big topic. We actually have a caller online too. Salaam alaikum.
Salaam alaikum. How are you?
I'm great, thanks. Thank you for calling in. Do you have a question?
Yeah, so my question is, what are you guys' thoughts, because you guys are both young women in your 20s, you look like, or maybe late teens, you guys look very young. What do you think about waiting and leaving all to chance into the wedding night to have sex? Because obviously sex is a very important part of a relationship or a marriage. Do you think it's a good idea to say that I'm going to be completely halal, I'm going to wait until the wedding night and then be disappointed potentially? Or do you think you should test the cow before you buy the cow, so to speak?
Sorry, can you repeat that for me? You cut off slightly.
The last bit.
Just the actual question. So if we, as young women...
The actual question is, you guys are young women, and sex is a very important part of a marriage. What do you think? Do you think it's a good idea to be halal and wait until the wedding night and leave it to chance? Or do you think you should test the cow before you buy the cow, so to speak?
I didn't hear the second part. Nadia, did you hear the second part?
Yeah. I heard the second bit. Something about kind of testing before you actually kind of
testing the waters before you sign the contract.
Yeah.
Thank you for sending in that question. A very interesting question. Nadia, what is your take on that?
Well, I guess my view on that is quite clear cut. I mean, obviously this day and age where kind of males, females, boys and girls there is a lot of mixing. Obviously, we've got social media. I know you've done an episode on social media as well, and the whole kind of journey of finding a partner using social media and things like that, the influence of social media. So it is obviously very difficult for people or parents even, and individuals to maintain certain boundaries. Or if maybe young people do tend to get into relationships, maybe that they didn't intend to get into, but sometimes obviously things happen. And I guess this is where the boundaries are important. Like if you're a young person and you know that for me, actually, the kind of intimacy, the physical contact with opposite sex, all of that, it definitely waits until after marriage. Then if you're speaking to somebody who is trying to step over this line, I guess that would be a red flag, because it would, if that's a no-go, then you shouldn't need to compromise, or you shouldn't feel pressured to kind of go down that route if it's something that you're kind of going quite against. Or obviously, from a religious perspective, I guess the rules do feel quite clear in the sense that, no kind of intimacy or physical contact before marriage. So my personal view is sticking to that. You're not marrying a person because of the quality of like the sex life. You're marrying a person for so much more than that. So I guess, our decision to marry somebody also shouldn't be based on just that quality.
Well, talking to pressures, coming back to an earlier call we had a gentleman that came through as a caller, but we had to lose him because his connection was lost. But the point he was trying to make is that, we shouldn't be feeling pressure in this society as being British Muslims and people of faith. And he was trying to say that there shouldn't be any Western boundaries that need to be combated to, your own personality. What do you think on that, Dr. Nadia? Can we be ourselves? Do we need to listen to the culture that we live in? Do you feel like we can be ourselves as British Muslims and people of faith, or do we need to accustom to the culture that we live in?
I don't know if we can separate the two, because we're a kind of accumulation of our environment and the places that we grow up in. And I mean, I guess sometimes people can see these boundaries and things as maybe a bit of a Western concept, but I mean, our culture is quite different now as well. Like, if you think about how homes and villages are built in Pakistan, for example, and we're thinking of boundaries, so literally, like, neighbors don't have walls. Like, there's literally, everyone is so joined together, and the families come and go so much that yeah, maybe the concept of boundaries probably doesn't exist there. Not in as explicit as it is in the Western world. But I definitely think it is important because I know women, young people generally are learning more about themselves and their identities. We have more opportunities. We have sort of more aspirations. There are things that we can do with our lives that maybe older generations or people in other countries might not necessarily have the opportunities to. So yeah, I mean, there's so much of how the Muslim landscape changes as the culture changes and depending on where we live and things.
And speaking of pressure, we'll just go back to that. At the moment, for example, like young Muslim women or just generally young women, in the West, there is a whole like conception that, you know, with liberation, there's a lot of talk on like sexual liberation for women. So as a Muslim woman who knows the boundaries in terms of religion, how can she approach that pressure from living in Western society? Because a lot of young Muslim women do face this.
Yeah, sorry, what was that, liberation in terms of?
So like the feminist discourse in the West, majority of the time does speak on sexual liberation, for example, and there'll be certain ideas and beliefs that are against our religion. And for a young Muslim that is studying that discourse or, you know, is surrounded by that, do you feel like there's any pressure? And if so, how to combat that?
I don't know. I guess it's because obviously from an Islamic perspective, I guess, yeah, feminism is something that obviously the West has kind of pioneered that, and there's been a kind of idea of, women being strong, women being kind of independent, kind of liberated and things. But I mean, we have similar things from within the religion as well. It's not necessarily that Muslim women need that kind of saving or that liberation. There are things from maybe a cultural perspective that are still maybe quite, sometimes can be seen as quite oppressive. But yeah, I think it is a learning curve. I think definitely things are changing.
And if there's anything that you could change, Dr. Nadia, perhaps in the education system from a psychological perspective for young Muslims to benefit not only them, but in general, what would it be? Is there anything in particular that we're perhaps not taught in schools that would help our personal development and psychological growth? Yeah,
I would definitely say about the kind of the communication, being able to kind of know. I guess it comes back to maybe some of the self-esteem, and I guess where women particularly, I've noticed, I mean, from my own either personal experiences or research and things, that women in South Asian communities can be quite self-sacrificing, and I guess part of this is because of not necessarily having boundaries or being shown the importance of boundaries for them as an individual. So they become really kind of enmeshed with other family members. And I think for women, it is really important for them to kind of, I don't want to use that, I guess, find their voice or use their voice, becoming more confident in using their voices.
So self-sacrificing is something you would pinpoint in the South Asian community. That is a struggle and a challenge. Is there anything else that you would want to address and perhaps also bring to light?
I would say about kind of the equality in relationships as well. This is something that, yeah, I guess maybe it ties in with the self-sacrifice, but oftentimes we can maybe try and adopt certain roles, or there's certain roles that are maybe given to us. But these are things that, if we think about feminism and the kind of structures that we might be challenging, or the maybe oppressive structures or patriarchal kind of forces of power, or whatever you want to call them, kind of patriarchal culture or sexism, these types of things, I would definitely say more people are learning about these, and it is important to challenge them. But it's something that, it's not just a kind of female battle, it's something that we need to do as a community. So even like our husbands or our brothers or our fathers, like this is something that it's equally as important for them as well, because it benefits the whole community.
Indeed, that's some interesting points you raised there. We'll get back to the cultural intersection and boundaries. We have another caller on line 3, Brother Abdul. Assalamu alaikum.
How are you guys doing? You okay?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for calling in. What is your question, sir?
Hello, I'm calling again. My last question was about waiting for marriage and the wedding night, all stuff. But my last question is in the Quran, in 33:50, it says that Muhammad was able to have any believing woman he wanted. So what are you guys' thoughts on that? So he was able to have any woman he wanted. What's your thoughts on it now with men only being able to have sex during marriage? So he got revelation of any woman he wanted, but Muslim men now can only have women they choose to marry. Do you think that's a bit unfair, or what do you think?
Thank you for your question. Unfortunately, I am in no position or qualification to give a religious interpretation on the Holy Quran.
How come? You guys are both Muslim women, so you guys could, if you wanted to, have your own interpretation on it.
Well, I don't know. I haven't actually ever come across that before, so I wouldn't be able to comment anything on that either.
Okay, if you want to, for the next time, it's verse 33:50. It's where Allah says that lawful to you are your wives and your sex captives and those stuff, women, anyone you want really. Yeah, it's 30-50.
And so the question is, if we think that Muslim men nowadays are, they think they can get any woman they want?
No. The Muslim men are rushed. Sorry. Muslim men are rushed into marriage, whilst Muhammad could have any woman he wanted. Do you think that's kind of a contradiction?
Okay. I get what he's asking. Basically, that there's a particular verse in the Quran that suggests that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was able to kind of have sexual relations with his wives as well as other women, and that is it unfair that that's not allowed for men these days? But actually, like I mentioned, I've never come across that interpretation before, and I don't have enough kind of religious knowledge to be able to answer a question like that.
Last question, are you Welsh?
Welsh? Yeah, I'm from Wales originally.
Well, okay. All right. Thank you guys. Have a great night, guys. Thanks for answering the call.
You too. Thank you for calling in, Abdul. Bye-bye. Take care. Good night. Just to reiterate to the audience, and this show is, we don't actually have the religious qualifications, experience, or background to speak on religious interpretations, just for future preference. But if you want to, we have a show on British Muslim TV. It's called Ask the Alim, and you can ask him any religious-related questions you want to and direct your questions to him, and he's always more than happy to answer them. But on this show, no religious interpretations from me or my guests. Back to our previous conversation, Nadia, we were talking about cultural intersections with boundaries and psychology, and we were talking about self-sacrifice, etc. Now, so you've worked with Southeast Asian communities. Is there any other communities you've worked with and noticed a slightly different intersection when it comes with culture?
So I mean, a lot of my work, so I work within the NHS, so I've previously worked within the NHS as well, so I've seen clients from loads of different backgrounds. But in my kind of private work, I'm working predominantly with Muslim women from a South Asian background, probably because, I mean, if they can maybe see somebody in the field that could understand their cultural and religious backgrounds a bit more. So that's why they probably do approach me for to help with some of their issues. But amongst sort of other clients that I see, I guess, the issues that they come with are quite different. So I do find that actually the women from South Asian communities or Muslim women that I've worked with, there does seem to be kind of a pattern of difficulties in relationships, whether that's with in-laws or parents. There seems to be there's some kind of struggle in those spaces. So it's interesting. I do wonder kind of what that's about, and is that maybe a kind of signal of women shifting and becoming a bit more autonomous and putting themselves first a bit more, which is why they might be coming up against some of these issues from kind of bigger systems. But yeah, something maybe kind of a bit of food for thought there, but just a reflection on the kind of things I've seen in my work.
That is very interesting, actually. You raised that. And speaking of, so you said you worked in the NHS, so you do work in the NHS and privately, mashallah. Now, I don't want to ignore the big elephant in the room, and that's coronavirus and lockdown. With working with your clients privately, do you feel like there's any new challenges or difficulties they've raised with you that has been directly caused by the pandemic or lockdown measures?
Interestingly, not much. I mean, there have been people that I've sort of worked with who kind of lost a job or kind of in financial difficulties. Sometimes it can be tricky for people. I think obviously when they're at home, kind of living or staying with family, not able to kind of go out really, so you're kind of with the same people pretty much day in, day out. Sometimes I think that can maybe exacerbate issues a little bit because it can be difficult to get that time away. It can be difficult to have those boundaries in place to maybe, to go out and socialize or, going out to work even, because even for me, so many of us, we were used to working outside of the house, but now everything, schooling, work, even our kind of leisure time, all of it is happening in the house. Sorry, can you still hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you for your response. Okay. And in terms of being in the house, like yourself and many others across the UK that are on lockdown and have to work from home, it is a time where a lot of mental health advocates, psychologists, and anyone that does work in those related fields say that people, mood can be lower, people go through mental health hardships, etc. What would be your best advice for someone that is feeling under the weather during lockdown and is at the home? Is there anything you'd recommend them to do? What would be your best advice, speaking from an expert level?
Yeah, so it's a good question. Obviously, we're going to be in the situation for, lockdown particularly, of the rest of the month, but the virus is still going to be around after that. But ways that people can look after their mental health at home, making sure that they have a kind of routine, making sure that they're still getting out of bed at a reasonable time, they're still kind of showering, getting dressed, having their meals, kind of, obviously those are the very, very basics, but even still trying to do things that they enjoy doing. Obviously we're very limited at the moment with that because a lot of the enjoyment we get would maybe happen outside. We're trying to create some sort of structure in the day that may be kind of similar to what would have happened previously, but also taking time to kind of switch off from things, because I think when we're home, we might tend to consume a lot more media as well. So it's important to have time where you do switch off, disconnect from kind of internet and taking information and news. Obviously, there's a lot of huge news that's happened through the year and currently as well. But I think it is a really good time to kind of maybe work on relationships as well. I mean, I did say that some issues can be exacerbated, but it can also be a time where things can be resolved or aired, or you can just spend time with family in a different way.
Indeed, those were some pretty good and helpful points. Thank you so much, Dr. Nadia. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. We have covered boundaries, we've covered lockdown, we've covered self-development pointers, a range. Thank you again so much. And if there's anything, just to quickly wrap up for our audience, you can feel free to share with them.
Yeah. I mean,
any last messages?
We have touched on quite a few things, and I guess kind of bringing it back to where the episode maybe started in terms of boundaries, and when you're trying to find a partner or even during marriages, I guess I would say to not be afraid to put yourself first. that it's not selfish to kind of think about what you need and prioritizing your needs. It doesn't mean obviously that we do it from, when we do set boundaries and we think of ourselves, that we do it from like a selfish kind of place, but we do it from a place that is actually caring to us. And I guess when we're in a good place and we feel happy, then that also allows us to bring our best self into the relationships that we have as well. So yeah, it's not selfish to think about yourself.
That is a very beautiful ending. You all heard Dr. Nadia, put yourself first. Thank you so much, Dr. Nadia. It's honestly been such a pleasure to have you and have your expertise and knowledge, mashallah, on the show. I've benefited extensively, and I'm sure the audience have as well. In terms of next week, guys, remember you can also be a part of next week's conversation through WhatsApp, and you can also call in just as you did today. We will see you this time next week, 9:30 p.m. Assalamu alaikum.